My name is Elena Vasquez, and at 27 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing in the ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel watching my older brother humiliate me in front of his new colleagues. For 3 years, Derek had painted me as the family disappointment. The sister who chose art over accounting, who lived in a modest apartment instead of a luxury condo, who would never understand what real success looked like. But when he introduced me to his new team as his charity case sister, who makes pretty pictures for a living, something shifted. The moment his new boss stepped forward and said those 4 words that changed everything, "You're Elena Vasquez, right?" The look of confusion, then dawning horror on Derek's face, is something I'll treasure forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my studio door like an afterthought. Elegant cream cardstock, with Derek's initials embossed in gold, the kind of stationery that screamed expensive, but had no soul. You're cordially invited to celebrate Derek Vasquez's promotion to Regional Creative Director at Morrison Associates. Cocktails and dinner at the Meridian Grand Hotel, Saturday evening, 7 o'clock sharp. Black tie preferred, I almost threw it away. 3 years of radio silence. 3 years of family gatherings where Derek made it clear I was an embarrassment to the Vasquez name. 3 years of watching him climb the corporate ladder while dismissing everything I'd built as hobby art. The last time we'd spoken was at our cousin Maria's wedding, where he'd loudly announced to anyone who would listen that I was still playing with finger paints while he was making real money in real advertising. But curiosity has always been my weakness when it comes to family. That stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe success had softened him. Maybe he wanted to make amends. The invitation felt like an olive branch, even if it was wrapped in his usual pretension. Morrison Associates. Even the name carried weight in the city's creative industry. They were the agency behind the campaigns everyone talked about, the ones that won awards and shaped culture. Derek had been chasing a position there since college, schmoozing at industry events, name-dropping connections, positioning himself as the next big thing in creative direction. That he'd finally made it should have made me happy for him. Should have. I set the invitation on my easel and stared at it while I mixed colors for my current piece. A commission for the Hartwell Foundation, though Derek would never know that. He'd never bothered to ask who bought my work or why galleries kept calling. In his mind, art was either mass-market commercial design or starving artist delusion. He couldn't conceive of the space between, where real artists made real livings creating real beauty. My studio apartment in the Arts District wasn't much to look at from the outside. A converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls and large windows that caught the morning light perfectly. Derek had visited exactly once, 3 years ago, spending the entire time making snide comments about the neighborhood and asking when I planned to move somewhere respectable. He'd walked past 3 of my paintings hanging in the living area without a single comment, too busy critiquing my choice to use vintage furniture instead of buying new. What he didn't see, because he didn't want to see, was the carefully organized space where I created work that sold for 5 figures per piece. The north-facing windows that provided perfect, natural light. The custom storage system for my materials. The separate area where I photographed finished pieces for collectors who couldn't visit in person. The home office where I managed a business that had quietly become more profitable than his advertising salary, even before his promotion. But Derek saw what Derek wanted to see. The shabby neighborhood. The unconventional living space. The sister who'd chosen passion over pragmatism and was obviously paying the price. I picked up the invitation again, reading between the lines. Black tie preferred. At the Meridian Grand. He was making a statement, showing off for his new colleagues, proving he belonged in their world of expense accounts and networking events. The fact that he'd invited me at all was probably strategic. Look how magnanimous I am, including my struggling artist sister in my moment of triumph. The Meridian Grand Hotel was everything Derek aspired to be. All marble columns and crystal chandeliers, where senators held fundraisers and tech moguls announced acquisitions. A single room there cost more than most people spent on rent, But Derek had always been drawn to symbols of status over substance. He'd rather eat ramen for a month than miss an opportunity to be seen in the right place with the right people. I walked to my closet and pulled out the black dress I'd bought for gallery openings. Simple, elegant, expensive enough to belong but understated enough not to attract attention. Derek would probably find something to criticize about it anyway. Too artistic, not corporate enough, missing some essential element that separated the serious professionals from the creative types. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Sophia. "Please tell me you're not actually going to this thing." She'd been trying to talk me out of attending ever since I'd mentioned the invitation. "Your brother is a narcissistic asshole who treats you like garbage. Why give him another opportunity? Because maybe he's changed," I typed back, though I didn't believe it myself. "People like Derek don't change, Soph. They just get better at hiding who they really are." She wasn't wrong, but family is complicated. Derek wasn't always cruel. Growing up, he'd been protective, almost parental after our father left. He'd helped me with homework, driven me to art classes, even defended my choice to major in fine arts when our mother worried about my future. The shift happened gradually, as he got deeper into the corporate world and further from the creative person he'd once been. Or maybe he'd always been this person, and success had just given him permission to show it. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made the city feel electric with possibility. I spent the morning in my studio, working on a piece for a private collector in Singapore. The kind of international client Derek would never imagine I had, because he'd never bothered to ask about my work beyond dismissive comments about paint by numbers. The painting was nearly finished, a large, abstract piece that captured the energy of urban movement through layers of color and texture. It would sell for $28,000, more than Derek made in 2 months at his old job. The irony wasn't lost on me that while he celebrated his promotion to a 6-figure salary, I'd been quietly earning that much per piece for the past 2 years. But Derek measured success differently. For him, it was about titles and offices, and being seen in the right places with the right people. My work, no matter how profitable or critically acclaimed, would always be just finger painting to him, because it didn't fit his narrow definition of legitimate business. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing understated jewelry and pulling my dark hair into a sleek bun. The woman in the mirror looked polished, professional, successful, nothing like the struggling artist Derek would introduce me as. I grabbed my small clutch, the one that contained business cards I probably wouldn't need but carried out of habit, and headed for the door. The Uber ride to the Meridian Grand took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. The driver, a middle-aged man named Carlos, recognized the hotel name and whistled appreciatively. "Big event tonight? Some kind of corporate party?" "Something like that," I said, watching the city blur past the window. I'd attended events at the Meridian before, gallery openings and charity auctions, where my work was featured, but always.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
As an artist, never as someone's charity case sister. The hotel's entrance was all valet stands and doormen in crisp uniforms. A line of expensive cars waited to disgorge their passengers. Businessmen in tailored suits and women in designer dresses, who moved through the world with the confidence that comes from never having to question whether they belonged. I stepped out of the Uber feeling momentarily displaced among the luxury vehicles, then remembered that I'd chosen the car service deliberately. Derek would expect me to arrive in something modest, would probably make a comment about not being able to afford parking or valet service. Let him think what he wanted to think. The lobby was exactly as I remembered it from previous events. Soaring ceilings, Italian marble floors, arrangements of exotic flowers that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. The kind of space designed to make visitors feel either awed or inadequate, depending on their relationship with wealth and power. A discreet sign directed guests to the Morrison Associates celebration in the Metropolitan Ballroom. I followed the flow of well-dressed people down a carpeted corridor lined with museum-quality artwork, pieces I recognized from auction catalogs and gallery exhibitions. The hotel's collection was impressive, though I doubted most of the evening's guests would notice anything beyond the price tags. The ballroom doors were guarded by 2 hostesses with clipboards and practiced smiles. Name, please? The blonde one looked up expectantly, her gaze taking in my dress and jewelry with the kind of quick assessment that separated industry insiders from random party crashers. Elena Vasquez. +1 for Derek Vasquez. She scanned her list, found my name, and handed me an elegant name tag already printed with Derek Vasquez's guest in flowing script. Not my name, just my relationship to the man being celebrated. I clipped it to my dress and walked into the ballroom, wondering if Derek had specifically requested that I be identified only as his guest, erasing even my individual identity from the evening. The Metropolitan Ballroom was exactly what Derek would have chosen for maximum impact. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in ivory linens, each centerpiece a small fortune in white orchids and candles. A jazz quartet played softly from a small stage, their music mixing with the sound of conversations and the gentle clink of expensive glassware. The guest list was clearly curated for maximum networking potential. I recognized several faces from the business pages. Creative directors from competing agencies, clients whose campaigns I'd seen in national magazines. These were Derek's people now, the crowd he'd been trying to break into since college. Tonight was his debut as one of them, his official welcome into the inner circle of the city's creative elite. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the room for Derek. I found him near the bar, holding court with a group of people I didn't recognize. He looked exactly like the successful creative director he'd always wanted to be. Expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, the kind of confident body language that came from finally achieving a long-sought goal. He saw me approaching, and his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Relief that I'd actually come, mixed with something that might have been anxiety. As if he wasn't quite sure how this would go but was committed to playing it out. Elena! He stepped forward, arms spread for a hug that felt more performative than genuine. I'm so glad you could make it. His voice carried the slight edge it always had when he was trying to impress other people. Congratulations, Derek. I meant it, despite everything. Whatever else he was, he'd worked for this moment. He pulled back from the hug but kept one hand on my arm, steering me toward his group of colleagues. I want you all to meet my sister Elena. She's the artist in the family. Still trying to make it in the creative world, but you know how that goes. The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Still trying to make it. As if I were some struggling recent graduate, instead of an established professional with a growing international reputation. The group smiled politely, the kind of professional courtesy extended to relatives of important colleagues. A woman with silver hair and sharp eyes stepped forward. Catherine Morrison, agency founder. Derek's told us so much about you. What kind of art do you create? I paint, mostly. Large-scale abstract work. Some collectors are interested, but it's a difficult market. I kept my voice modest, playing into Derek's narrative rather than correcting it. This wasn't the time or place to reveal the truth about my success. Not yet. Well, Catherine said with the patronizing tone of someone who'd never struggled for anything, keep at it. You never know what might happen. Derek beamed as if he'd orchestrated this encouragement personally. That's what I keep telling her. Persistence pays off eventually. The conversation moved on to safer topics. Derek's transition into his new role, upcoming campaigns, industry gossip that excluded me by design. I stood at the edge of the circle, sipping champagne and playing the part of the grateful sister who was thrilled to be included in her successful brother's big night. But I was watching too, studying the group dynamics, the way Derek positioned himself as the clever newcomer who brought fresh perspective to established relationships. He was good at this, I had to admit. Good at reading rooms and knowing exactly what people wanted to hear. Excuse me, Elena? A voice behind me made me turn. A young man in his late 20s, tall and lean with the kind of earnest expression that suggested genuine artistic sensibilities rather than corporate ambition. I'm James Richardson, Junior Creative Director. I don't mean to interrupt, but are you Elena Vasquez the painter? I think I know your work. Derek's conversation faltered slightly, his attention shifting back to us. The group continued talking, but I could feel his awareness sharpening. Possibly, I said carefully. I do show in some local galleries. James's face lit up. The Hartwell Foundation exhibition last spring. The series about urban transformation. Those were incredible pieces. I stood in front of migration patterns for 20 minutes. The way you captured movement through static medium was extraordinary. My heart jumped slightly. Migration patterns had been one of my breakthrough pieces, the painting that established my reputation among serious collectors. But how did Derek's new colleague know about it? "Thank you," I said simply. "That's very kind." "Kind?" James looked confused. "It's honest. That exhibition was one of the most important shows of the year. Everyone in the creative community was talking about it." Derek had gone very still. The conversation around him continued, but his focus was entirely on James and me now. His expression was unreadable, but I caught something that might have been confusion flickering behind his eyes. James turned to Derek. "You must be so proud of your sister. Having that kind of artistic success in the family must be incredible." Derek's smile never wavered, but it took on a sharp quality. "Oh, Elena's always been creative. She does some nice work, sells a few pieces here and there. We're all very supportive of her hobby." "Hobby?" James looked genuinely shocked. "Mr. Vasquez, your sister's work sells for $30,000 apiece. She's represented by Whitmore Gallery, one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in the city. Last I heard, she had a 6-month waiting list for commissions." The silence that followed was complete. Derek's practiced smile froze in place. The conversation around us died as Catherine Morrison and the other colleagues turned their attention to our exchange. "I'm sorry," Catherine said slowly, "but did you say $30,000? Per painting?" James nodded enthusiastically, seemingly oblivious to the tension he'd created. "At least. The piece she sold to the Singapore collector last month went for $42,000. It was in RT News." Elena Vasquez is one of the rising stars of contemporary abstract expressionism. Derek's face had gone pale. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but complete bewilderment. As if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "Elena?" His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "Is this true?" Before I could answer, another voice joined the conversation. "Elena! I didn't expect to see you here." I turned to find Marcus Chen, one of the city's most prominent art collectors, approaching our group. He was older, distinguished, with the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. I'd met him several times at gallery events, and he'd purchased 2 of my smaller pieces for his private collection. "Marcus," I said, genuinely pleased to see a friendly face. "How are you?" "Wonderful, wonderful." He kissed my cheek in the European style, a gesture that felt natural after years of gallery openings and collector events. "I was just telling my wife about your latest series. When can we expect to see it exhibited?" "I'm still working on the final pieces. Probably next spring." "Excellent. We'll want first viewing, of course." His attention shifted to Derek and the others, who were watching this exchange with varying degrees of confusion and interest. "Marcus Chen," he introduced himself to Derek, extending his hand. "You must be Elena's brother. She's mentioned you." Derek managed to shake hands, but his composure was clearly shaken. Marcus Chen was a name even Derek would recognize, a collector whose endorsement could make careers and whose collection was regularly featured in design magazines. "Mr. Chen," Catherine Morrison stepped forward, her business instincts overriding her surprise. "Catherine Morrison, Morrison Associates." "Ah." Marcus smiled warmly. "The agency behind the Meridian Hotel campaign. Brilliant work. Very sophisticated understanding of luxury market psychology." "Thank you." Catherine accepted the compliment gracefully, then glanced between Marcus and me. "Mr. Chen, you mentioned Elena's latest series. Are you a patron of hers?" "Patron seems too formal," Marcus laughed. "I'm a collector who's been fortunate enough to acquire several of Elena's pieces. She's one of the most exciting contemporary artists working today. Her understanding of color and movement is extraordinary." Derek found his voice, though it sounded strained. "I had no idea you were so connected to the art world, Elena. It was such an understatement that it might have been funny if it weren't so revealing." Derek genuinely had no idea about any aspect of my professional life. He'd been so busy dismissing my work as hobby art that he'd never bothered to research what I actually did, or who bought my paintings. Marcus looked between us with dawning understanding. Oh my. You really don't know, do you? Know what? Derek's voice had an edge to it now, about Elena's career. Marcus's tone was gentle, but incredulous. She's one of the most successful artists under 30 in the city. Her work is in private collections internationally. The Whitney is considering one of her pieces for their contemporary American exhibition next year. The Whitney? James practically gasped. Elena, that's incredible. The Whitney Museum of American Art was one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. It's just preliminary discussions, I said quickly, but Derek wasn't listening. He was staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. Elena, he said slowly, what exactly do you do for a living? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, the party continued, but our little group had become its own bubble of tension and revelation. I could feel Catherine Morrison's sharp intelligence, focused on the family drama unfolding before her, James's confused admiration, Marcus's protective instincts as someone who genuinely respected my work. I paint, Derek. I've been painting professionally for 5 years. I have representation with Whitmore Gallery, commissions from private collectors, and yes, my work sells for 5 figures per piece. This isn't a hobby. It's my career. But Derek was shaking his head. That's impossible. You live in that tiny apartment in the Arts District. You drive that old Honda. You never have money for anything nice. Because I choose to live simply, I said patiently. Because I prefer to invest my money rather than spend it on status symbols. Because I like my neighborhood, and my car serves its purpose. Marcus was watching this exchange with fascination and growing concern. Elena, perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private? No, I said firmly. Derek wanted to introduce me to his colleagues as his struggling artist sister. They deserve to know who I really am. Catherine Morrison stepped forward, her business instincts fully engaged now. Ms. Vasquez, Elena, could I ask you something? Have you ever considered commercial applications for your work? Corporate installations, that sort of thing. I've done a few. The Hartwell Foundation building, the new Riverside Medical Center, several private offices. But I prefer gallery work mostly. Of course you do, Catherine said, and I could see her mental calculations clicking into place. Elena, I'd love to discuss some potential collaborations with you. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting? Derek's mouth opened and closed several times. He looked like a man whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been challenged. His little sister, the family disappointment, was being courted by his new boss, while his colleagues treated her with the kind of respect he'd been desperately seeking his entire career. I'd be happy to discuss it, I told Catherine, pulling one of my business cards from my clutch. The card was elegant, minimalist, with my name in simple black letters above my gallery representation and contact information. Catherine studied the card like it contained state secrets. Whitmore Gallery. Very impressive. They're extremely selective about their artists. James was practically bouncing with excitement. This is amazing. Derek, you must have grown up in such a creative household. Having Elena as a sister must have been incredibly inspiring. Derek managed a weak smile. Yes, Elena's always been the artistic one. But the damage was done. The narrative he'd constructed for the evening, the dynamic he'd planned to establish with his colleagues, had been completely undermined. Instead of being the successful brother graciously including his struggling sister, he was now the man who'd somehow failed to notice that his sister was more successful than he was. Marcus checked his watch, an elegant piece that probably cost more than Derek's car. Elena, I should let you get back to the party, but please don't forget about dinner next week. Sarah is dying to hear about your Singapore commission. Of course. Give her my love. He kissed my cheek again and moved away, leaving our group in stunned silence. Around us, the party continued, but I could feel the shift in how Derek's colleagues were looking at me. No longer the charity case sister, but an accomplished professional in her own right. Catherine broke the silence first. Elena, I have to ask. When you said you prefer to live simply, how simple are we talking about? I smiled at the directness of the question. I own my studio outright. No mortgage. I have a comfortable savings account and a diversified investment portfolio. I travel when I want to, buy what I need, and support causes I believe in. I just don't feel the need to broadcast my financial success through conspicuous consumption. James was shaking his head in admiration. That's incredible. Most artists struggle for years before achieving that kind of stability. I've been fortunate, I said modestly, and I've had good business advice. Derek found his voice again, though it sounded hollow. When did all this happen? Over the past 5 years, Derek. While you were building your career, I was building mine. The difference is that you never asked about mine. The accusation hung between us, gentle but undeniable. Derek had spent years positioning himself as the successful sibling, while completely ignoring what I was actually accomplishing. He'd been so invested in his own narrative of success that he'd never bothered to discover that his supposedly struggling sister was doing better than he was. Catherine's business instincts were fully engaged now. Elena, I'm serious about that meeting. Morrison Associates works with Fortune 500 companies who are always looking for distinctive art installations. Your work could be perfect for several current projects. I appreciate that, Catherine. I'll have my gallery representative reach out to schedule something. Your gallery representative? Derek repeated faintly. Victoria Whitmore handles my business affairs, along with my accountant and attorney. I said it matter-of-factly, but I could see Derek processing the implications. Gallery representation, business managers, legal counsel. These weren't things hobby artists needed. James was practically glowing with enthusiasm. Derek, this is so exciting. Having Elena in your family must give you incredible insight into the creative process. No wonder Morrison Associates wanted you. The artistic perspective you bring from growing up with a successful painter must be invaluable. Derek's smile had become increasingly strained. He looked like a man trapped in a conversation that was spiraling completely out of his control. Every word of praise for me seemed to diminish him in his own eyes, as if success were a finite resource that my achievements somehow stole from his. Actually, I said quietly, Derek and I haven't talked about my work much over the years. We've both been focused on our own careers. It was a diplomatic way of saying that Derek had spent years dismissing everything I did while expecting me to celebrate every minor advancement in his own career. But the subtext was clear to everyone listening. Catherine looked between us with the sharp perception of someone who'd built a successful business by reading people and situations accurately. I see, she said simply, but her tone suggested she understood exactly what kind of family dynamic she was witnessing. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a microphone being tested. On the small stage, a man in an expensive suit was preparing to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. The ballroom gradually quieted as guests turned toward the stage. Derek straightened, clearly relieved to have the focus shift away from our family drama and back to the celebration of his achievement. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Derek Vasquez's promotion to Regional Creative Director. As many of you know, Derek brings a fresh perspective and innovative thinking to our team. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek Vasquez. The applause was warm and genuine as Derek made his way to the stage. I clapped along with everyone else, putting aside our personal issues to acknowledge his professional accomplishment. Whatever else was happening between us, he'd worked hard for this moment. Derek took the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd imagined this scene many times. Thank you all for being here tonight. This promotion represents not just a personal achievement, but the opportunity to work with the most talented creative minds in the industry. He launched into a speech that was part gratitude, part vision statement, part networking opportunity. He thanked his new colleagues, acknowledged his mentors, outlined his goals for the regional office. It was professional, polished, and completely focused on his own achievements and ambitions. Not once did he mention family. Not once did he acknowledge that his success existed within the context of relationships and support systems. It was as if Derek Vasquez, the regional creative director, had emerged fully formed, without history or personal connections. I watched him speak and felt a familiar sadness. This was the brother who'd helped me apply to art schools, who'd driven me to my first gallery interview, who'd once understood that creativity required encouragement and faith. Somewhere along the way, he'd decided that supporting my dreams made him smaller rather than larger. When Derek finished his speech, the applause was enthusiastic. He'd clearly made a good impression on his new colleagues, positioning himself as both grateful for the opportunity and confident in his ability to deliver results. As he stepped down from the stage, James turned to our group with obvious admiration. "That was a great speech. Derek's going to do amazing things in this role." "I'm sure he will," I agreed sincerely. Derek was talented, ambitious, and driven. His success wasn't undeserved, even if his treatment of family left something to be desired. Catherine was watching me with calculating interest. "Elena, I keep thinking about your work. The way you described color and movement in abstract forms. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need for the Meridian Hotel expansion project." "The Meridian Hotel expansion?" I'd heard rumors about it. A massive renovation and addition project that would reshape part of the downtown skyline. $40 million project, Catherine explained. They want art installations that complement the architecture while making a statement about contemporary luxury. It's exactly the kind of commission that could establish an artist's international reputation. Derek had rejoined our group in time to hear Catherine's last comment. "What commission?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was afraid to hear the answer. "I was just telling Elena about the Meridian project," Catherine explained. "Her work would be perfect for the lobby installations we're designing." Derek's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been envy. "Elena? For the Meridian project?" Catherine nodded enthusiastically. "Elena's work has exactly the sophistication and scale we need. Plus, working with a local artist adds authenticity to the project narrative." I appreciated Catherine's enthusiasm, but Derek looked like he might be sick. This was his night, his celebration, his moment to shine in front of his new colleagues. Instead, he was watching his supposedly struggling sister being offered opportunities that would dwarf his own career achievements. "That's very flattering, Catherine, but I'd need to see the specifications before making any commitments. Installation work is different from gallery pieces." "Of course," James said. "But imagine seeing your work in that space every day. Thousands of people experiencing your art, business people from around the world, seeing what contemporary American creativity looks like." It was an appealing prospect, but I could feel Derek's discomfort radiating from beside me. This was supposed to be his night, his introduction to the world he'd always wanted to join. Instead, his colleagues were more interested in discussing opportunities for his sister. "Derek," Catherine said, turning to include him in the conversation. "You must be so proud of Elena's success. Having an internationally recognized artist in the family must be incredibly inspiring for your own creative work." Derek managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Elena's always been the artistic one in the family. It was the same dismissive phrase he'd used earlier, but now it sounded hollow. Catherine and James had seen enough evidence of my professional success to know that artistic one was a significant understatement. The conversation was interrupted by another colleague joining our group, a woman in her 40s with the kind of sharp professional energy that suggested senior management. "Catherine, there you are. I've been looking for you." The woman's gaze swept over our group and landed on me with obvious interest. "You must be Elena Vasquez." "I'm Rebecca Torres, Morrison Associates, Director of Strategic Partnerships." Rebecca had clearly been briefed on my presence, which meant word was spreading through the party about Derek's secretly successful sister. I shook her offered hand, wondering how Derek was processing this continued attention. "Rebecca, Elena was just considering the Meridian installation project," Catherine explained. "Considering?" Rebecca's eyebrows rose. "Elena, that project could establish you as one of the premier installation artists in the country. The international exposure alone would be worth millions in future commissions." I appreciated her enthusiasm, but I could see Derek becoming more uncomfortable with each passing moment. This was his celebration, his introduction to colleagues he'd been trying to impress for years. Instead, they were treating his sister like a celebrity while he stood on the sidelines. "It's certainly an interesting opportunity," I said diplomatically, "but I'd need to understand the full scope before making any decisions." "Of course," Rebecca agreed. "Why don't we set up a meeting for next week? You could tour the space, meet with the architects, see the vision they're developing." Before I could respond, Derek finally snapped. "Excuse me, but this is my promotion party. Maybe we could focus on that instead of planning Elena's next career move?" The words came out sharper than he'd probably intended, revealing the frustration and resentment he'd been building all evening. Our group fell silent, the professional courtesy that had carried us through the earlier revelations suddenly absent. Catherine looked at Derek with surprise. "Of course, Derek. We're all here to celebrate your achievement. It's just exciting to discover that artistic talent runs in your family." Derek's jaw tightened. "Elena's success doesn't have anything to do with my promotion." "No one said it did," James said gently. "We're just impressed by both of you. Having a successful artist for a sister must be amazing." "You'd think so," Derek said, his voice carrying an edge that made everyone uncomfortable. "But Elena's never shown much interest in what I do. Too busy with her own important work." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Derek was revealing years of resentment, his belief that my success somehow diminished his own, that my focus on my career was a betrayal of family loyalty. I felt anger rising in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "Derek, I've supported your career for years. I celebrated every promotion, every account win, every achievement. The difference is that you never asked about mine. Because you never told me how successful you were," Derek shot back. "You let me think you were struggling while you were making more money than I was. Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. "Would you have treated me differently if you'd known? Or would you have found other reasons to dismiss what I do?" The question silenced him because we both knew the answer. Derek's dismissal of my work had never been about money or success. It had been about his need to position himself as the achiever in the family, the one who understood how the real world worked. Catherine stepped in smoothly, her business instincts recognizing a situation that needed diffusing. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to enjoy the party. There's wonderful food, excellent music, and we're here to celebrate Derek's well-deserved promotion." The group began to disperse, conversations resuming with the forced cheerfulness of people pretending they hadn't witnessed a family argument. James lingered long enough to give me his business card and express genuine enthusiasm for potentially working together. Rebecca did the same, her professional interest undiminished by Derek's outburst. Soon it was just Derek and me, standing at the edge of the ballroom, the party continuing around us while we faced each other across years of misunderstanding and resentment. "I never meant to upstage you tonight," I said quietly. "I came here to celebrate your success." Derek's anger seemed to have burned itself out, leaving behind something that looked like exhaustion. "You really make $30,000 per painting?" "Sometimes more, depending on the piece and the client." He shook his head slowly. "I had no idea. I tried to tell you, Derek, so many times over the years. But every conversation became about your achievements, your goals, your vision of success. You never asked about mine." We stood in silence for a moment, watching his colleagues network and celebrate, the evening continuing despite our personal drama. Finally, Derek spoke again. "I don't understand how this happened, how you became so successful without me knowing." "Because you didn't want to know," I said simply. "You decided I was the struggling artist's sister, and that story served your needs better than the truth." Derek looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Maybe we should talk more. After tonight, when things are less complicated." "Maybe," I agreed, though I wasn't sure what there was left to say. Years of dismissal and resentment weren't easily undone by a single conversation. As if summoned by our moment of tentative reconciliation, Marcus Chen reappeared at my elbow. "Elena, I'm heading out, but I wanted to remind you about the Richardson collection viewing next Thursday. They're considering commissioning a major piece, and I think you'd be perfect for it." The Richardson collection was legendary among serious art collectors. Their commissions the kind of career-defining opportunities that artists waited decades to receive. Derek watched this exchange with the dawning realization that his sister's professional life existed on a level he'd never imagined. "Thank you for the reminder, Marcus. I'll be there." "Excellent." He kissed my cheek again, nodded politely to Derek, and moved toward the exit with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Derek stared after Marcus as he disappeared into the crowd, then turned back to me with an expression of complete bewilderment. "The Richardson collection?" "Elena, that's one of the most prestigious private art collections in the world." "I know." I kept my voice neutral, though inside I was feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that Derek was finally understanding the scope of my professional life. Sadness that it had taken this kind of public revelation for him to see me clearly. "How long have you been moving in these circles?" Derek's voice was quiet now, the earlier anger replaced by something closer to shock. 5 years, Derek. Since my first major sale. But you never asked about my clients or my exhibitions, or where my work was being shown. You were too busy telling everyone I was playing with finger paints." The accusation hit home. Derek flinched as if I'd slapped him, the memory of his dismissive comments clearly fresh in his mind. Around us, the party continued with its elegant chaos of networking and celebration, but our conversation had created its own bubble of intensity. Catherine Morrison reappeared, approaching us with the purposeful stride of someone who'd made a decision. "Elena, I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I've been thinking about our conversation. Could we step outside for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss privately." Derek started to follow, but Catherine's attention was focused entirely on me. This seemed to be a conversation that didn't include him, despite this being his celebration. I glanced at my brother, seeing uncertainty flicker across his features. "Of course," I told Catherine. "Derek, I'll be right back." We made our way through the ballroom and out onto one of the hotel's terraces, a beautifully appointed space with city views and the kind of strategic lighting that made everything look like a magazine photo. Catherine pulled out her phone and showed me a series of images. "These are preliminary renderings for the Meridian expansion project," she explained. "The lobby installations we discussed. The budget for the art component alone is $2 million. I studied the images with professional interest. The space was magnificent, soaring ceilings and clean lines that would showcase large-scale work beautifully. The kind of commission that could define an artist's career and establish international recognition. It's a stunning space," I admitted. "The scale would allow for really impactful pieces." Catherine smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd accurately read her audience. "Elena, I'm going to be direct. Morrison Associates wants to recommend you for this commission. Not just as one of several artists being considered, but as our primary choice." I felt my heart rate increase slightly. This was a career-changing opportunity, the kind that separated working artists from art world stars. "That's incredibly generous, Catherine. But I have to ask why you're offering this after knowing me for all of 2 hours. Because I've done my homework in the last hour," Catherine said with a slight smile. "While you were talking with your brother, I made some calls. Your reputation in the art community is exceptional. Victoria Whitmore says you're one of the most professional artists she's ever represented. Marcus Chen called you a generational talent. The curator at the Whitney described your work as transformative. She'd made calls during the party? I was impressed by her thoroughness and slightly overwhelmed by the speed at which things were moving. More importantly," Catherine continued, "I watched how you handled yourself tonight. Your brother clearly had no idea about your success, yet you didn't embarrass him or make him look foolish. You maintained dignity under circumstances that would have made most people defensive or vindictive. That tells me you have the emotional intelligence to handle a high-profile commission professionally." I appreciated the assessment, though it made me wonder what she'd observed about Derek's behavior toward me. Catherine struck me as someone who missed very little. "There is one complication," I said honestly. "Derek, this is his celebration, his introduction to your company. Offering his sister a major commission on the same night might create some awkwardness." Catherine's expression became thoughtful. "Elena, can I ask you something personal? How long has your brother been dismissive of your work?" The directness of the question caught me off guard, but Catherine's manner suggested genuine interest rather than idle curiosity. "Years," I said simply. He's never taken my art seriously. And how has that affected your career? It hasn't, I admitted. My success has been independent of his opinion, but it's affected our relationship. Catherine nodded slowly. In my experience, Elena, family members who diminish your achievements early in your career rarely become supportive later, regardless of how successful you become. They're too invested in their original narrative about who you are. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. I thought about all the times I'd tried to share good news with Derek, only to have him redirect the conversation to his own career or dismiss my achievements as luck rather than skill. What are you saying? I asked. I'm saying that Derek's comfort level shouldn't determine whether you accept opportunities that could transform your career. Catherine's voice was firm, but not unkind. You didn't create the awkwardness in your family dynamic. You shouldn't sacrifice your professional growth to manage his feelings about your success. Before I could respond, the terrace door opened, and Derek appeared, looking agitated. There you are. People are asking where the guest of honor went. Actually, Catherine said smoothly, we were just discussing some potential collaboration opportunities. Elena's work would be perfect for several of our upcoming projects. Derek's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. More projects? Elena, you do realize this is my celebration, right? My introduction to these people? The petulance in his voice was unmistakable, and I saw Catherine's eyebrows rise slightly. She was witnessing exactly the kind of family dynamic she'd just described, Derek's inability to celebrate anyone's success but his own. Derek, I said quietly, I didn't ask for any of this attention. I came here to support you. By upstaging me? Derek's control was slipping again, the professional facade he'd maintained all evening cracking under the pressure of seeing his narrative about our family completely demolished. Catherine stepped in with the cool professionalism of someone accustomed to managing difficult personalities. Derek, perhaps we should rejoin the party. Your colleagues are eager to continue celebrating your promotion. But Derek wasn't ready to let it go. Do you have any idea how this looks? My supposedly struggling sister is suddenly the center of attention at my own promotion party? Elena hasn't done anything inappropriate, Catherine said, her voice carrying a subtle warning. She's been gracious and professional throughout the evening. Professional? Derek laughed bitterly. She's been networking at my expense. Actually, Derek, I think you have that backwards. Catherine's tone had cooled considerably. Elena has been approached by people who recognize her reputation. She hasn't been promoting herself or seeking attention. The rebuke was polite but unmistakable. Catherine had moved from interested observer to active defender, and Derek seemed to realize he was alienating his new boss by attacking me. I'm sorry, he said, though his apology sounded forced. It's been a long evening, and I'm probably more tired than I realized. Catherine accepted the apology with professional courtesy, but I could see her making mental notes about Derek's character. In her world, how someone treated family members probably revealed more about their true nature than any professional presentation. Why don't we go back inside? I suggested, hoping to diffuse the tension before Derek damaged his career further. We returned to the ballroom, but the dynamic had shifted. Derek's colleagues continued to be polite, but there was a subtle distance now, as if they'd sensed something off about his behavior. Or perhaps word had spread about the family drama playing out at their celebration. James Richardson approached us with a drink in hand, and enthusiasm undimmed by the earlier awkwardness. Elena, I wanted to follow up on something. You mentioned the Hartwell Foundation Commission earlier. I heard they're planning a companion piece for their new satellite location. Derek tensed beside me, but I kept my focus on James. They've discussed it, but nothing's been finalized. Well, if you're interested, I know someone on their board. Happy to make an introduction. The offer was generous and genuine, the kind of professional courtesy that happened naturally in artistic communities. But I could feel Derek's growing resentment with each new opportunity that was mentioned. That's very kind, James. I'd appreciate the connection. Excellent. James pulled out his phone. Let me get your contact information. As I shared my details with James, I noticed Derek watching with an expression that had moved beyond confusion into something darker. He was realizing that his sister's professional network was more extensive and more prestigious than his own, despite years of dismissing her work as amateur dabbling. Rebecca Torres rejoined our group, her energy focused and businesslike. Elena, I've been thinking about our earlier conversation. The Meridian project is just the beginning. Morrison Associates is developing relationships with 3 other major property developers, all looking for distinctive art installations. Derek couldn't stay silent any longer. Excuse me, but Elena isn't looking for new projects. She has her own career to manage. The presumption in his statement was breathtaking. Derek was attempting to speak for me, to control opportunities he'd just learned existed, as if my success required his permission or oversight. Actually, Derek, Rebecca said, with barely concealed irritation, Elena is perfectly capable of managing her own career. And from what I understand, she's been doing so quite successfully for years. The rebuke was gentle but firm, and I saw Derek's face flush with embarrassment. He was being corrected by his new colleagues, lectured about respecting his sister's autonomy, by people he'd been trying to impress all evening. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said diplomatically. Derek's just looking out for me. We haven't had a chance to really talk about my work in a while. It was a face-saving lie, but Rebecca wasn't buying it. Her expression suggested she understood exactly what kind of family dynamic she was witnessing. Of course, she said smoothly. But Elena, the offer stands. These are career-defining opportunities, and talent like yours shouldn't wait for perfect timing. The implication was clear. Don't let family politics derail your professional growth. Rebecca had recognized Derek's attempts to control my choices and was pushing back against them. Marcus Chen reappeared, this time accompanied by a woman I recognized as Sarah Chen, his wife, and a noted art patron in her own right. Elena, dear, I wanted Sarah to meet you before we left. Sarah Chen was elegant and sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that came from decades of moving in artistic and cultural circles. She took my hand warmly, studying my face with obvious interest. Marcus has told me so much about your work, she said. The piece you created for the Singapore collector, Migration Patterns, we saw it at the preview exhibition. Absolutely stunning, thank you, Mrs. Chen. That means a great deal coming from you. Please, call me Sarah. She glanced around our group, taking in Derek's tense posture and the subtle dynamics at play. Marcus tells me you're considering the Meridian installation project. It's been mentioned, I said carefully, aware that Derek was listening to every word. Sarah's eyes lit up. Elena, that project could establish you internationally. The kind of exposure that transforms careers. Derek stepped forward slightly, inserting himself into the conversation. Elena's still building her local reputation. International projects might be premature. The statement was so condescending, so dismissive of everything that had been revealed about my career that evening, that even Sarah Chen looked shocked. She glanced between Derek and me with obvious confusion. I'm sorry, she said politely, but I think there might be some miscommunication. Elena's work is already known internationally. The Singapore Commission came through referrals from collectors in New York and London. Derek's mouth opened slightly, another piece of information that contradicted his assumptions about my career. International collectors. International referrals. His supposedly struggling sister was operating on a global scale he'd never imagined. Marcus stepped in smoothly. Sarah, we should let Elena enjoy the party. But, Elena, don't forget about Thursday's viewing. The Richardson family is particularly interested in your use of color in large-scale work. As the Chens moved away, Derek turned to me with an expression of complete bewilderment. International collectors? Elena, what exactly haven't you told me? Everything, Derek. I've tried to tell you everything for years, but you weren't interested in listening. The accusation hung between us, simple and devastating. Derek had spent years constructing a narrative about my life that served his need to be the successful sibling, and he'd been so invested in that story that he'd ignored all evidence to the contrary. Catherine Morrison appeared at Derek's shoulder, her timing suggesting she'd been monitoring our conversation. Derek, could I speak with you for a moment? About your transition into the new role? Derek nodded, clearly relieved to escape the uncomfortable conversation about my career. As they moved away, I heard Catherine's voice, carefully modulated but firm. Derek, I want to discuss expectations for collaboration and professional conduct. I couldn't hear the rest of their conversation, but Derek's body language suggested he was receiving feedback that wasn't entirely positive. Catherine had witnessed his behavior toward me throughout the evening, and it seemed she was addressing it directly. James approached me again, this time with genuine concern in his expression. Elena, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your brother seems uncomfortable with your success. It's complicated family dynamics, I said diplomatically. May I offer some advice? James's voice was gentle but serious. I've seen this before in creative industries. Family members who are threatened by your success rarely become more supportive as you achieve more. They often become more resentful. The observation echoed Catherine's earlier comment, and I found myself wondering if Derek's reaction tonight was just the beginning of a larger problem. Would my success always be a source of tension between us? Don't let his discomfort limit your opportunities, James continued. Your talent deserves to be seen and celebrated, regardless of how it makes other people feel. Before I could respond, Derek and Catherine returned, though Derek's expression suggested their conversation hadn't gone entirely in his favor. Catherine's professional smile was intact, but there was a new coolness in her manner toward my brother. Elena, Catherine said, I wanted to follow up on our earlier discussion. Would you be available for a meeting next Tuesday? We could discuss the Meridian project in detail. Derek started to speak, but Catherine's attention remained focused on me. This is Elena's decision, Derek. Her career, her choice. The message was unmistakable. Catherine had addressed Derek's controlling behavior directly, and was now ensuring it wouldn't influence business decisions. Tuesday would be fine, I said. Should I have my gallery representative contact your office? Perfect. Catherine handed me an elegant business card. Direct line to my assistant. She'll coordinate with Victoria Whitmore. As Catherine moved away, Derek and I were left alone again, the party continuing around us while we faced the wreckage of our family dynamic. The evening had revealed not just the extent of my professional success but the depth of Derek's resentment and need to control my choices. Elena, Derek said quietly, I think I owe you an apology. For tonight? Or for the past 3 years? The question was pointed but not cruel. Derek needed to understand that his behavior this evening was part of a larger pattern, not an isolated incident caused by stress or surprise. For all of it, he said finally. For not taking your work seriously. For not asking about your career. For assuming you were struggling instead of bothering to find out the truth. It was more acknowledgement than I'd expected, but I wasn't sure it represented real understanding or just embarrassment at being caught in his assumptions. Derek, why didn't you want to know about my success? What would have been so threatening about having a successful artist for a sister? He was quiet for a long moment, watching his colleagues network and celebrate around us. Finally, he spoke with more honesty than I'd heard from him in years. Because it meant I wasn't special anymore. Being the successful one, the one who understood how the world really worked, that was my identity in our family. If you were successful too, especially in something creative, it meant I'd been wrong about everything. The admission was painful in its honesty. Derek's treatment of me hadn't been about my career at all. It had been about his need to be the family success story, the one who'd figured out how to navigate the professional world while his artistic sister floundered. But Derek, I said gently, my success doesn't diminish yours. There's room for both of us to be successful. I know that intellectually, he said. But emotionally, it felt like competition. Like if you were doing well, it somehow made my achievements less meaningful. Around us, the party was beginning to wind down. Colleagues were exchanging final business cards, making plans for follow-up meetings, preparing to leave with the satisfied exhaustion that followed successful networking events. Derek's celebration was ending, but the real consequences of the evening were just beginning. Rebecca Torres approached us one final time, her manner professional but warmer than it had been with Derek. Elena, I wanted to make sure you had my direct contact information. The projects I mentioned earlier are moving quickly, and I'd hate for timing to be an issue. She handed me another business card, this one with her personal cell phone number written on the back. Call me tomorrow if you're interested. We can discuss details and timeline. Thank you, Rebecca. I'll definitely follow up. Excellent. She turned to Derek with polite courtesy. Derek, congratulations again on your promotion. I'm sure you'll do excellent work in your new role. The dismissal was subtle but clear. Rebecca had written Derek off as someone whose professional judgment was questionable, based on his treatment of me throughout the evening. As Rebecca walked away, Derek watched her go with obvious regret. He was beginning to understand that his behavior tonight had consequences beyond our family relationship. He'd damaged his reputation with new colleagues, who would remember how he'd treated his successful sister. Elena, Derek said quietly, what can I do to fix this? Between us, I mean. The question was loaded with years of complicated history. Derek's dismissal of my work hadn't just hurt my feelings. It had shaped how I related to my family, how much I shared about my life, how much I trusted his support. I don't know, Derek. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about years of you deciding who I was instead of bothering to find out. But now I know, he said. Now I understand what you've accomplished. Do you? I asked. Because 5 minutes ago you were trying to prevent me from considering new opportunities. Even after learning about my career, your instinct was to control my choices. Derek fell silent, recognizing the truth in my observation. His apology might be sincere, but his behavior suggested deeper issues that wouldn't be resolved by a single conversation. The evening was clearly ending. Guests were beginning to leave, thanking Derek for the celebration and expressing enthusiasm for working with him in his new role. But I noticed the conversations were shorter now, more formal, lacking the warmth and enthusiasm that had characterized earlier interactions. Derek's colleagues had formed opinions about him based on how he'd treated me, and those opinions weren't entirely favorable. In trying to diminish my success, he'd revealed character flaws that professional acquaintances would remember. Catherine Morrison made her final approach of the evening, her manner courteous but businesslike. Derek, thank you for a lovely evening. Elena, I look forward to our meeting next week. She shook hands with both of us, but her attention lingered on me. Elena, I meant what I said earlier. Your talent deserves opportunities that match its scope. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The message was directed at me but clearly intended for Derek to hear. Catherine was ensuring that her final words of the evening reinforced my professional autonomy and warned against family interference. As Catherine walked away, Derek and I stood alone in the slowly emptying ballroom. The celebration was over, but the real work of dealing with what had been revealed was just beginning. Derek, I said finally, I need some time to think about all of this. About the opportunities? Or about us? Both. Tonight has been overwhelming, and I need to process what it means for my career and our relationship. Derek nodded, though I could see disappointment in his expression. He'd hoped for immediate forgiveness, instant repair of a relationship that had been damaged by years of dismissal and resentment. Can I ask you something? Derek said. Are you going to accept the Meridian Commission? If the terms are right and the project fits my artistic vision, probably yes. Even though it might overshadow my promotion? The question revealed that Derek still didn't understand the fundamental issue. He was still thinking in terms of competition, still viewing my success as a threat to his own achievements. Derek, your promotion stands on its own merits. My career decisions aren't about you, just like yours shouldn't be about me. But we're family, Elena. Doesn't that mean we should consider how our choices affect each other? It means we should support each other's success, not try to limit it. There's a difference between consideration and control. Derek fell silent, processing the distinction I'd drawn. Around us, the hotel staff was beginning to clear tables and reset the ballroom for tomorrow's events. Our evening was officially over. I should go, I said, gathering my clutch and preparing to leave. Elena, wait. Derek reached out, not quite touching my arm but stopping me from walking away. Tomorrow, could we talk? Really talk? About everything that's happened tonight? I considered the request. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect myself from further disappointment, if Derek couldn't sustain his newfound understanding. But another part hoped that maybe, finally, we could have an honest conversation about our relationship. Call me tomorrow afternoon, I said. after you've had time to think about what you really want to say. Derek nodded gratefully. I will. And Elena? I am proud of you. I should have said that years ago. As I walked toward the exit, I reflected on the evening's events. I'd come to celebrate Derek's promotion, and ended up revealing the success I'd kept private for years. The consequences were still unfolding. But one thing was clear. The dynamic between Derek and me had changed permanently. Whether that change would lead to a better relationship or a complete breakdown remained to be seen. But for the first time in years, Derek would have to see me as I really was, not as he'd assumed I should be. The valet brought my car around, and as I drove home through the quiet city streets, I thought about the opportunities that had emerged from the evening's chaos. The Meridian Commission, the other projects Rebecca had mentioned, the connections that had been offered freely by people who respected my work. Derek's reaction to my success had been painful but also liberating. I no longer had to hide my achievements or downplay my career to make him comfortable. Whatever happened next in our relationship, it would be based on truth rather than the fiction he'd constructed about my life. As I pulled into my building's parking garage, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Tomorrow would bring follow-up calls about new projects, decisions about commissions that could transform my career, and perhaps most importantly, a conversation with Derek that might finally establish an honest foundation for our relationship. The evening had ended my life as the family's supposedly struggling artist. Whatever came next would be built on the reality of who I actually was, not on anyone else's assumptions about who I should be. The phone rang at precisely 2 o'clock the next afternoon, just as I was putting the finishing touches on a preliminary sketch for the Richardson Collection viewing. Derek's name appeared on the screen, and I let it ring twice before answering, needing those extra seconds to prepare myself for whatever conversation was about to unfold. Elena? His voice carried none of the confident bravado from the night before. Instead, he sounded tired, uncertain, like someone who'd spent the morning confronting uncomfortable truths about himself. Hello, Derek. I've been thinking about everything that happened last night. About what you said, about how I've treated you over the years. You were right. I owe you more than an apology. I set down my charcoal pencil and moved to the window, looking out at the afternoon light filtering through the trees in my neighborhood. The same view Derek had dismissed as evidence of my poor choices, never knowing that I'd chosen this apartment specifically for its natural light and creative atmosphere. What exactly have you been thinking about? Everything. How I introduced you to my colleagues. How I tried to speak for you when Catherine offered those opportunities. How I made your success about my insecurity instead of celebrating what you've accomplished. His voice carried genuine remorse, but I'd heard Derek apologize before, usually when he needed something, or when his behavior had created consequences he couldn't ignore. The test would be whether this understanding lasted beyond our immediate conversation. Derek, can I ask you something honestly? When did you decide I was a failure? The question seemed to catch him off guard. There was a long pause before he answered, and when he did, his voice was quieter. I don't think I ever decided that, exactly. It was more gradual. When you chose art school over business school. When you moved to that neighborhood instead of somewhere more professional. When you kept talking about galleries and exhibitions instead of getting what I thought was a real job. So you decided my choices were wrong without ever asking why I made them. Yes, Derek's admission was simple and devastating. I thought I knew better. I thought I understood how success worked, and your path didn't fit my understanding. What changed your mind? Last night, I mean. Was it the money? The recognition from your colleagues? Another long pause. Derek was clearly struggling with how to answer honestly without making himself look even worse. Partly, he said finally. But more than that, it was watching how people reacted to you. The respect in their voices when they talked about your work. The way Catherine and Rebecca took you seriously as a professional. I realized I'd never shown you that kind of respect, not once in all these years. It was more self-awareness than I'd expected from Derek, but it also highlighted the depth of his misconceptions. He'd needed outside validation to recognize my worth, couldn't see my success until it was reflected back to him through the opinions of people he respected. Derek, I said gently, what if those people hadn't been there last night? What if it had just been family dinner, and I tried to tell you about my career? Would you have believed me? The silence that followed was answer enough. Derek would have dismissed my claims, assumed I was exaggerating or deluding myself about my success. He'd needed the witness of his professional peers to accept what I'd been trying to tell him for years. Probably not, he admitted. And that's what I'm trying to apologize for. Not just last night, but years of not listening, not asking, not taking you seriously. I appreciate the apology, Derek. But I need to understand what you want to happen now. Are you apologizing because you feel guilty, or because you want our relationship to be different? Different. Definitely different. Elena, I want to know about your work, really know about it. I want to understand what you've built and how you built it. I want to be the kind of brother who celebrates your success instead of resenting it. The words sounded sincere, but Derek had always been good with words when he needed to be. The challenge would be translating intention into sustained behavior change. What does that look like practically? I asked. How do we rebuild trust after years of you dismissing everything important to me? I don't know, Derek said honestly. I was hoping you might have ideas about that. At least he wasn't assuming he could fix everything with a single conversation. That was progress of a sort. Derek, I need you to understand something. My success isn't new. I've been building this career for 5 years. And you've been actively discouraging me for most of that time. The damage to our relationship isn't something that gets fixed overnight. I understand. I think. Derek's voice carried the uncertainty of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. What can I do to start rebuilding your trust? You can start by educating yourself about my work without expecting me to do the teaching. You can look up my exhibitions, read about my commissions, understand what I actually do instead of making assumptions. I can do that. I should have done that years ago. You can also stop trying to manage my career decisions. The way you tried to discourage me from considering those opportunities last night, that can't happen again. You're right. That was completely inappropriate. Your career is your choice. We talked for another 20 minutes, covering ground that felt both familiar and foreign. Derek asked questions about my work that he'd never shown interest in before, listened to answers without trying to redirect the conversation to his own achievements. It felt like speaking with a different person, though I remained cautious about how long this new dynamic might last. After we hung up, I sat in my studio thinking about forgiveness and family, and the complicated mathematics of second chances. Derek's apology seemed genuine, but apologies didn't erase years of dismissal and condescension. The question was whether he could sustain this new understanding long enough to rebuild our relationship. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Morrison. Elena, thank you again for last evening. Could we move our Tuesday meeting to Wednesday? Something urgent has come up with the Meridian project, and I'd prefer to have complete information before we discuss details. I texted back my agreement, then spent the rest of the afternoon working on the Richardson piece. The commission was for a large abstract work exploring themes of transformation and growth, concepts that felt particularly relevant given the upheaval in my family dynamic. Tuesday brought a call from Rebecca Torres with details about the other projects she'd mentioned. 3 different developments, each requiring significant installations, with budgets that would establish me financially for years to come. The kind of opportunities that transformed working artists into art world stars. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek's attempt to diminish me in front of his colleagues had instead introduced me to career-defining possibilities. His need to position me as his struggling sister had backfired spectacularly, revealing my success to people who could amplify it exponentially. Wednesday's meeting with Catherine took place in Morrison Associates, downtown offices, a sleek space that spoke of creative vision tempered by business acumen. Catherine led me through the Meridian project details with the thoroughness of someone who'd built her reputation on managing complex collaborations. The scope was even more impressive than she'd initially described. 5 major installations throughout the hotel's public spaces, with complete creative freedom within broad thematic guidelines. The kind of project that would be featured in architectural magazines and establish international recognition. Elena, Catherine said as we concluded our discussion, I want to address something from Saturday night. Your brother's behavior toward you was inappropriate, and I want you to know it won't influence our professional relationship. I appreciate that, Catherine. Family dynamics can be complicated. They can be, but they shouldn't interfere with business decisions. Your talent and professionalism stand on their own merits. As I left the Morrison Associates offices, I reflected on how different this conversation might have been if Derek had succeeded in controlling my choices Saturday night. His attempt to speak for me, to limit my opportunities, could have derailed possibilities that might not come again. That evening, Derek called again, this time with evidence that he'd followed through on his promise to educate himself about my work. He'd spent 2 days researching my exhibitions, reading reviews, understanding the scope of my career in ways he'd never bothered to before. Elena, I had no idea about the Hartwell Foundation Commission. The scale of that project, the complexity of the installation, it's incredible work, thank you. It was one of my favorite projects, actually. The Foundation's mission aligned perfectly with what I was trying to express about community and transformation. And the piece that sold to Singapore, Migration Patterns, I found images online. It's beautiful, Elena. Really beautiful. His appreciation seemed genuine, unmarked by the dismissive undertones that had characterized his previous comments about my work. For the first time in years, Derek was seeing my art as art, rather than as evidence of my impractical life choices. We talked for an hour about my different projects, about the creative process, about the business side of being a professional artist. Derek asked questions that showed real interest rather than polite obligation, listened to answers without trying to redirect conversations to his own achievements. It felt like talking to the brother I remembered from childhood, the one who'd encouraged my creativity before success and competition complicated our relationship. Whether this version of Derek would persist remained to be seen, but for one evening it felt like progress. Thursday's Richardson Collection viewing was exactly the kind of event that had once seemed impossibly prestigious and now felt like a natural part of my professional life. The Richardson family's private gallery showcased museum-quality pieces, and walking through their collection felt like receiving a masterclass in contemporary art. The commission they were considering would be the centerpiece of a new wing dedicated to emerging artists, a position that would establish me among the most important painters of my generation. As I discussed their vision with the family patriarch, I thought about Derek's years of insisting that art wasn't a real career. Marcus and Sarah Chen were also at the viewing, along with several other collectors I'd met through previous sales. The art world, I'd learned, was smaller and more interconnected than outsiders realized. Reputation and relationships mattered as much as talent, which made Derek's public dismissal of my work at his own party even more potentially damaging. But instead of harming my reputation, Saturday night seemed to have enhanced it. Several people mentioned hearing about my grace under pressure, my professionalism in difficult circumstances. Derek's attempt to embarrass me had instead demonstrated character traits that made collectors and curators more interested in working with me. Friday brought a call from Victoria Whitmore with news that 3 different museums were now interested in acquiring pieces for their permanent collections. The kind of institutional recognition that separated serious artists from commercial decorators. Validation that transcended market success. Elena, Victoria said, I've been representing artists for 20 years, and I've never seen momentum build this quickly. Whatever happened at that party Saturday night, it's opened doors that usually take decades to access. I thought about Derek's insistence that I was just playing with finger paints, his dismissal of my work as hobby art. If he could see the institutional interest now building around my career, would he finally understand what he'd been dismissing all these years? Saturday brought another call from Derek, this one different in tone from our previous conversations. Instead of apology or explanation, his voice carried excitement and what sounded like genuine pride. Elena, I saw the article in ART News about your Richardson commission. Front page of the Contemporary Art section. Your work is being compared to some of the most important painters of the last 50 years. I'd seen the article but hadn't expected Derek to be reading art publications. That he'd sought out coverage of my career represented a level of interest he'd never shown before. It's incredibly exciting, I agreed. The Richardson family has been collecting for generations, and being included in their contemporary wing is a tremendous honor. I'm proud of you, Elena. Really proud. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. Thank you, Derek. That means more than you might realize. Can I ask you something? How does it feel to have this kind of recognition? To know that your work will be in museums, that critics are comparing you to master painters. I considered how to answer honestly without sounding ungrateful or dismissive of the recognition I'd worked years to achieve. It feels validating, I said finally. Not because I needed outside approval to know my work had value, but because institutional recognition opens doors to larger projects, more ambitious installations. Like the Meridian Commission? Exactly. Each success builds on the previous ones, creating opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Derek was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of sustained success rather than isolated achievements. Elena, I want to ask you something and I hope you'll be honest with me. How much has my attitude over the years affected your willingness to share good news with our family? The question was perceptive and painful. Derek was beginning to understand that his dismissive comments hadn't just hurt my feelings, but had shaped my behavior, made me protective of my successes rather than sharing them openly. Significantly, I admitted, I stopped telling you about exhibitions because you'd dismiss them as local hobby shows. I stopped mentioning sales because you'd assume they were small amounts to friends. I stopped sharing excitement about commissions because you'd find ways to diminish their importance. So you've been celebrating major career milestones alone? Mostly. I have Sophia and a few other close friends who understand my work, but yes, I've kept family separate from professional success because it felt safer that way. Derek's silence spoke volumes. He was realizing that his behavior had cost him years of sharing in my achievements, had made him a stranger to the most important aspects of my life. Elena, is there any way to change that going forward? To rebuild the kind of relationship where you'd want to share good news with me? I hope so, Derek, but it has to be genuine. I can't go back to protecting your feelings by downplaying my success. I don't want you to. I want to celebrate your achievements the way a brother should. I want to be someone you call when good things happen, not someone you avoid to prevent conflict. The conversation felt like a turning point, though I remained cautious about expecting too much too quickly. Derek's understanding seemed genuine, but sustaining behavior change required more than good intentions. Sunday brought the call I'd been both expecting and dreading. Our mother, who'd heard about Saturday night's drama through family networks that moved information faster than social media. Elena, Misha, what happened at Derek's party? Your cousin Rosa heard from someone that there was some kind of scene about your paintings? I explained the situation carefully, emphasizing Derek's professional success while acknowledging the misunderstandings about my own career. Our mother listened with the kind of patience that came from years of mediating family conflicts. So you've been this successful for years, and none of us knew. Elena, why didn't you tell us? Because every time I tried, Derek would redirect the conversation or dismiss what I was saying. Eventually, I stopped trying. But Misha, we're your family. We should know about these wonderful things happening in your life. I wanted you to know, Mama. But it became easier to keep my professional life separate than to constantly defend its legitimacy. Our mother was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I'd revealed. When she spoke again, her voice carried disappointment that wasn't directed at me. I'm sorry, Elena. I should have asked more questions. Should have made sure you felt supported instead of letting Derek's attitudes influence how we talked about your work. It wasn't just Derek, Mama. But his dismissiveness made it clear that my art wasn't valued the same way his business success was. That changes now, she said, firmly. I want to know about your exhibitions, your commissions, everything. And Elena? I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. The conversation with our mother felt like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Derek's attitude toward my work hadn't existed in isolation, but had influenced family dynamics in ways that isolated me from the support system I should have had. Monday brought final confirmation of the Meridian Commission, along with contracts that represented the largest single project of my career. As I signed the papers in Victoria's gallery office, I thought about Derek's insistence that I'd never understand how the real world worked. The real world, it turned out, valued creativity and artistic vision more than Derek had ever imagined. His narrow definition of success had blinded him to possibilities that existed outside corporate hierarchies and traditional business models. That evening, Derek called with news of his own. He'd spoken with Catherine Morrison about potential collaboration opportunities, ways his new role could support artistic projects rather than just commercial campaigns. Elena, I know this might sound presumptuous, but I wondered if you'd be open to consulting on some of our creative strategy. not as my sister, but as a professional artist with expertise we could use. The offer was unexpected and loaded with potential complications. Working with Derek professionally would require navigating family dynamics in business contexts, but it also represented acknowledgement of my expertise in ways I'd never received from him before. I'd need to understand the scope and structure, I said carefully, and it would have to be a genuine professional relationship, not family obligation disguised as business opportunity. Absolutely. Catherine suggested it, actually, after she saw how our colleagues responded to your work Saturday night. She thinks your perspective could enhance several upcoming campaigns. The fact that the suggestion had come from Catherine rather than Derek made it more appealing. It suggested genuine business value rather than family politics. Have Catherine send me the details, and I'll consider it. Thank you, Elena, for considering it and for everything else. I know I have a lot of work to do to rebuild your trust, but I'm committed to doing that work. Tuesday's follow-up meeting with Rebecca Torres finalized details for 2 additional commissions, projects that would keep me busy for the next 18 months, while establishing relationships with developers who were reshaping the city's architectural landscape. As I walked back to my studio through the Arts District Derek had once dismissed as evidence of my poor judgment, I reflected on how profoundly my life had changed in less than a week. Not the fundamentals of my career, which had been building steadily for years, but the family dynamics that had shaped how I thought about my own success. Derek's public humiliation at his own party had forced conversations that might never have happened otherwise. His need to diminish me in front of his colleagues had instead revealed the extent of my achievements to people who could amplify them, while simultaneously exposing his character flaws to professional contacts whose opinions mattered to his career. The irony was complete and satisfying, though I took no pleasure in Derek's embarrassment. What mattered was the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on foundation of truth, rather than the fiction he'd constructed about my life. Wednesday brought a surprise visitor to my studio. Derek appeared at my door in the early afternoon, carrying coffee and wearing an expression of nervous determination. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced," he said. "I wanted to see your studio, really see it, understand the space where you create your work." I let him in, watching as he took in details he'd missed during his previous dismissive visit. The organization of my materials, the quality of my equipment, the natural light that made the space perfect for painting. He moved through the studio like someone discovering a foreign country, seeing familiar objects in entirely new context. "Elena, this is incredible. The way you've set everything up, the professionalism of it all. This isn't a hobby studio, this is a serious artist's workspace." "It always was, Derek. You just couldn't see it through your assumptions about what legitimate work looked like." He paused in front of my current work in progress, the piece for the Richardson Commission. The canvas was large, ambitious, layers of color and texture that would require weeks more work to complete. "Can you tell me about this one? What you're trying to capture?" I explained the concept, the techniques I was using, the vision I hoped to realize when the piece was finished. Derek listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my brother about something that mattered to me, rather than defending my choices against his criticism. As Derek prepared to leave, he turned back with an expression of regret mixed with determination. "Elena, I want you to know that I'm telling everyone about your success now. Not in a way that makes it about me, but because I'm proud of you and want people to know how talented my sister is. I appreciate that, Derek. But make sure you're doing it for the right reasons." "I am. I'm doing it because I should have been celebrating your achievements all along, and I want to make up for lost time." After he left, I stood in my studio thinking about second chances and the complicated work of rebuilding damaged relationships. Derek's transformation seemed genuine, but time would tell whether he could sustain this new understanding when the spotlight wasn't on our family dynamics. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Victoria Whitmore, with news that the Whitney Museum had officially committed to including one of my pieces in their upcoming Contemporary American exhibition. "Elena, this is career-defining recognition. The Whitney exhibition will establish you as one of the most important artists of your generation. As I hung up the phone, I thought about calling Derek to share the news. For the first time in years, the impulse felt natural rather than fraught with potential conflict. I dialed his number, and when he answered, his voice carried genuine warmth. "Elena, twice in one day. This is progress. Derek, I just got some news I wanted to share with you. The Whitney Museum is including one of my pieces in their contemporary American exhibition." The silence that followed lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Derek finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Elena, that's incredible. The Whitney Museum, that's everything for an artist, isn't it? It's significant recognition, yes. One of the most important exhibitions for contemporary American artists. I'm so proud of you, Elena. So incredibly proud. Thank you for calling me, for sharing this with me. Thank you for being someone I wanted to call." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.